Now, there has been several incidents of illegal military and security training camps in the country. In Mpumalanga, 95 Libyan nationals were arrested on suspicion of receiving training at an illegal military camp. Charges have been dropped against the men and court ordered for their deportation. In Limpopo earlier this month, the Hawks uncovered a suspected illegal security camp in Modimolle. For more on these camps, I'm joined by Professor Abel Esterhuyse, military specialist, Stellenbosch University. A very good afternoon to you, Prof. Thanks very much for your time on a weekend. We want to talk about the sort of how the charges against the Libyans were bizarrely dropped with hardly any much explanation as to what had exactly happened. And then while we're busy with that, there was this other camp in Modimolle. Just from what you've been able to, information you've been able to glean through, and from what perhaps people on the ground may have also discovered, is there a sense that we are actually very, is it vulnerable or susceptible to these kinds of people who have the profile that some investigative journalists have told us is the profile of the Libyans or the people behind them?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Vuyo. I think there's a couple of variables that we need to unpack in terms of what have been going on in the last 2-3 weeks. Let me start with the institutional argument, and there's questions about the extent to which the regulatory authority that is responsible for private security in South Africa have allowed this to happen. So that's the first argument I think that we need to explore, is from an institutional perspective, how camps like this was authorized or were authorized to operate in South Africa. I think that's the first argument. There's a second argument, a bureaucratic argument, in my opinion, that has to do with the DIRCO's role in all of this and how the Libyans were allowed in the first place to enter this country seemingly as students to receive this kind of training. And there's, I think, a question to be answered from a bureaucratic perspective by DIRCO on this issue that we need to explore. And then, of course, there's the role of intelligence. That's the third factor that we need to explore in the intelligence services. And it seems as if the intelligence services they were not really aware of these camps, and that they got a tip-off from our external intelligence services about the camps. And so there's something that we need to explore in that argument. And then lastly, in terms of international relations, the question as to how these camps are linked, firstly, to international terror, but also how external intelligence agencies are aware of things in our own country that we are not aware of. And then perhaps the last critical variable is the legal process that now seems to have stalled in one way or another. There seems to be quite interesting sort of findings on this, and I cannot explain this. I'm not a legal boffin. But yeah, there's questions about the legal process that's unfolding at the moment.
Now, what does this mean for the country then, Prof? Because if, as you say, we have these porous borders, if, as you say, we have these state security agencies that we know have been hollowed out, don't have the capacity that they are supposed to have, if our international relations regime is not quite in certainly with regard to this, because truth be told, they have done well in certain areas, but clearly they've been found wanting, certainly on this one. I know at some point there were attempts to even make this a diplomatic or international issue, the issue of the 95 Libyans, that is. And if our legal processes, and especially if you link them to the entire sort of criminal justice system, which has problems, what does this mean about, what does this say about our vulnerability and the propensity to be exploited by very, deliberate forces out there that may have the money, but also the intelligence that we clearly do not have?
Yeah, it is. I think, you have outlined it yourself beautifully. I think the important reality that we are facing here, if you integrate all the various arguments that I've put on the table, is that eventually it's not a positive story that we are working on here. Whether you look at it from a domestic political perspective and institutional perspective, it's not a positive story. Whether you look at it from an international political perspective, it's not a positive story. If you link it to, international terror, it's not a positive story. So all in all, if you take an integrated approach in placing this under the spotlight, I think, this is not a positive story for South Africa. And from a government side, one hope that they will deal with these kind of problems as a matter of urgency. We're sitting with terror problems in the region. We know about what is happening in Mozambique. So you don't want to link and establish the linkages between what is going inside South Africa in terms of the training and what is going on inside the region and further afield. So, yeah, all in all, I think this is not a positive story at the moment. We need...
Quickly though, Prof, quickly. Is all lost though? What can we still do, right? Without necessarily going to the detail of many things that may take time and loads of money but what can we still do that is within our means as we speak?
Well, I think there's an important issue to deal with in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of how people like this is allowed to so-called study in South Africa, how they entered in what seems to be a legal way of entering South Africa. I think there's without spending too much money, something can be done in that regard. And I think, we will have to work on our intelligence services. We need effective intelligence services in South Africa. And then from a regulatory perspective, I think it is important that the regulatory authorities that's responsible for private security companies in South Africa take an urgent look at their role in regulating these kind of activities. This can be done without too much resources. It can be done immediately, and it should be done, I think.
Prof, thank you very much for your time and insights.